Well, hello. My name is Kate Bracken. I am with the Master Gardener Association in Goochland, Powhatan. And I am glad to be here and for the soil, because without our healthy soil, we don't have life.
Welcome to For the Soil, a conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii. Dr. Eric Benfelt with Virginia Cooperative Extension Community Viability has joined us. Mary Sketch-Bryant is continuing to take the week off. She'll be back with us very soon. Dr. Benfelt, would you introduce our special guest, or should I say reintroduce our guest?
Yes, Jeff, we're again very pleased to have Dale Strickler with us. And Dale's both farmer, educator, author, and consultant and agronomist with Regenerative Wisdom. We talked a little bit in the last episode, Dale, about tillage, and we're trying to encourage minimizing soil disturbance. And you had shared the analogy of road building. If you could share that story with us.
Okay. Well, we were speaking about subsoiling and how people use subsoiling with the intent of loosening their soil to get better water infiltration and better root growth. And, it seems to make perfect sense. Your soil's too hard, so you go out there and you mechanically loosen your soil. It makes complete sense that would increase root growth and would increase water infiltration. The problem is that's not where we stop. We don't stop at that subsoiling, because we always follow it up because it's rough and not conducive to planting. So we make another tillage pass to smooth that up. And, last time I shared some research results that basically when you make that subsequent tillage pass, you completely not only eliminate that, you make it worse than it was before, compaction wise, water infiltration wise, root growth wise. It all goes backwards at that point. When you make a subsequent tillage or traffic pass, simply driving on it, at that point makes it more compact than it was before. And if you want evidence of that, watch how they build a highway. The procedure for building the roadbed of a highway is to subsoil, disc, pack, subsoil, disc, pack, subsoil, disc, pack. Essentially the same procedure that people think they're using to loosen their farm fields: subsoil, till, plant. It's the same exact procedure that we use to compact road beds. And only one of those can be right. We're either compacting or we're loosening. And if you want to know who's right, drive down a highway. And if you sink into the highway, let me know. If you don't sink into the highway, you know that you understand the fallacy of using subsoiling and subsequent tillage to loosen cropland. It's just that. It's a fallacy.
That is amazing. But it goes back to what we call the power of observation. What we think in one regard could be totally opposite in the other regard.
Yeah, and I have neighbors who have subsoiled and say, "Oh, it did so much good." I said, "What do you mean it did so much good?" "Well, we had more yield the next year." I said, "Well, why?" They say, "Well, the roots went deeper." I said, "Did you dig a pit and look at the roots?" I said, "Well, no, but the yield went higher." "Why did the yield go higher?" And oftentimes deep tillage, tillage in general often does increase yield. But you ask why, and we assume it's because of improved root depth or improved water infiltration. And a piece of information, when I was looking at the amount of organic matter destroyed by different tillage passes, and a subsoiler trip actually destroyed more soil organic matter than moldboard plow trip.
Wow.
And So organic matter contains nutrients, in particular nitrogen. And the amount of organic matter destroyed by one subsoiler pass in the study I saw destroyed enough soil organic matter to release 100 pounds of additional nitrogen to the field. So if it was like a huge shot of additional fertilizer. Now you can get a yield increase out of that, but it's not from the soil physical condition. It's essentially like using a debit card. You're cashing in your stored soil fertility and turning it into immediate fertility. And if you're somewhat short on nitrogen fertility, you can get a big yield boost out of that additional 100 pounds of nitrogen. That's a big deal. But it's not free fertilizer. It's fertilizer that you already paid for. You're just cashing savings into spending cash.
And Dale, with that idea of like, what would you suggest are practices and principles for, depositing more in the soil health account?
Well, obviously, we spoke last time about using cover crop roots to build soil and to build deeper soil. And one of the observations of people in long-term no-till corn soybean rotation, which has become kind of the standard crop rotation over a lot of the eastern United States, is that the soils do tend to become dense and hard, and they blame that on the lack of tillage. It's not so much the lack of tillage, it's the lack of root exudates. If you want to create really super compact soil, just spray Roundup on it or any other sort of herbicide to keep it completely vegetation free for a long period of time, and it will become like concrete because there will be no root exudates to feed those microbes. If you want to create loose soil with deep root zone, you do that with a lot of root exudates. And if you understand the oxygen cycle within soils, the limiting factor to root depth is lack of oxygen. So if you understand that during the growing season, now by the growing season, I mean the summer, most of the oxygen use is not by crop roots, it's by soil microbes. Those soil microbes become dormant when the soil temperature drops below 55 degrees. That's why we choose to apply anhydrous ammonia after the soil cools down in the fall. It won't convert into nitrate because there are no bacteria to do that process, or there's no active bacteria at that time to do that process. So once soil temperature cools down in the fall, there's oxygen present that wasn't present during the growing season. So that's how these cool season cover crops can grow much deeper roots, like your radishes can grow much deeper roots in the fall than a similarly deep-rooted crop can in the summer because there's more oxygen. And then the next year, that dead root channel from that radish or whatever deep-rooted fall cover crop was growing there. Now there's a pilot hole through those oxygen-limiting layers, which usually is our old plow pan, the compressed layer caused by previous tillage operations. Now there's holes, there's channels through that. You've got pilot holes through that. And as long as you don't cut that off with a tillage pass, those channels can act as tubes to conduct oxygen and allow root growth to deeper and deeper levels. And Ray Weil at Maryland, soil scientist there, he demonstrated about 16 inches greater root depth of a corn crop following a crop of radish.
We're talking today with Dale Strickler. He is a special guest of For the Soil, a Conversation. And Dale, I'm at your website now. It's called regenerativewisdom.com. You are an author, you're a farmer, you're a consultant, and I wanted to talk just a moment about some of the books that you've written. Probably the most popular is The Drought Resilient Farm. Also, another book that you authored is called Managing Pasture. And another interesting title, The Complete Guide to Restoring Your Soil. And that kind of rings a bell about a story I heard one time from an old farmer, and he said, here's a word of wisdom to you. Never buy a farm located on Stonyfield Lane. I thought, yeah, obviously, he had a great point there, but my point is about restoring the soil to a better conditioned soil. That's kind of a challenge, isn't it?
Yes, it can, but it's not, it can be done. Now, when I went to college, I was told that it takes, 1,000 years to build an inch topsoil. And so, it's talk about discourage, and you can't possibly hope to raise your soil organic matter within your lifetime. Those are discouraging messages. So we were essentially indoctrinated with this idea that you can't improve your soil, and I'm here to tell you that is incorrect. I owned a farm for a few years, and I started going to all these conferences and hearing about all these people that had successfully increased their soil organic matter. And so on my own farm, I thought I would put some of these techniques to use. And I took a soil test in 2005 when I really started this journey in earnest. 1.9% organic matter across the farm. And by 2021, 16 years later, sampled again. On one field, I had an 8.7% organic.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, what is average in the area where you live? Is there an average content for organic matter somewhere around 2% or so, or
2 to 3? On native rangeland that's never been plowed, it's usually about 6. So I increased higher than what native rangeland was, and did it in 15 years.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that field, what the rotations and what the management involved or didn't involve?
Well, it involved planting back to perennial grassland. And now that's not for everybody, but that was what I wanted to do. I planted to eastern gamagrass and alfalfa, and some deep, a lot of diversity, a lot of legumes, but also a highly productive warm season grass. It was an irrigated field, and managed this field with what some people call AMP grazing or management intensive grazing, daily movement, and leaving a very tall stubble so that photosynthesis never was interrupted. There was always plenty of green during the growing season. I had both warm season, cool season species in there, so that I have a very long period of capturing sunlight and a long period of root exudates, and just very high productivity to begin with. And just watch the soil build over time. It was a very heartwarming sight to see for someone who's interested in soil.
We're talking today with Dale Strickler, journalist, author, agronomist. He is a consultant. It's just at your website, once again, regenerativewisdom.com. Boy, a lot of resources at that website, not only books, but educational and media, and also sorts of events that are mentioned on your website. And I wanted to ask you, a moment ago, you used a word that I thought was rather interesting. You talked about during your journey. of improving the soil. And I'm curious, is there a single moment in your career that you can point to and say, okay, this is where I got inspired. This is who inspired me this is the person that lit my fire and got me started on this journey to improve my soil. Who is that?
Gosh, there was a lot of different ones, but one that stuck out. One of my college professors handed me a copy of a magazine called The New Farm. It was published by the Rodale Institute back in the 80s and early 90s. And it had an excerpt from a book in there called Tree Crops by J. Russell Smith. And tree crops essentially proposed, it talked about like hog production and so forth. Hogs were forest animals, poultry is forest animals. They lived off acorns and chestnuts and so forth. And then in our infinite wisdom, we settle forest, chop them all down, and grow corn and soybeans to feed pigs and chickens. And it's like when all these trees essentially fed them for free. And that book opened my mind to the possibility that there's always a better way to do things. Yeah, we can chop down forest and grow corn and soybeans, but the forest could have fed the pigs and chickens without all that work and expense and soil destruction.
Well, unfortunately, our time for this episode is about up. I want to thank you, Dale Strickler. I've learned a lot during the past few minutes and, of course, the previous episode. And for those who are listening to this episode for the first time, this is part 2 of our conversation with Dale Strickler. He is a consultant and agronomist. He is an author, has several books, Drought Resilient Farm, Managing Pasture, a complete guide to building healthy pasture for grass-based meat and dairy animals, and also the complete guide to restoring your soil. His website, once again, regenerative.wisdom.com. Dale Strickler, thank you for joining us.
You bet. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Benfeld. We'll catch you on the next one.
Yes, and look forward to meeting you in person, Dale.
For the Soil, a conversation is made possible with funding support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Agua Fund. Other partners include the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia State University, Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and partners of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Views expressed on this podcast are those of each individual guest. To download a copy of this or any other episode, visit the website forthesoil.org. If you have a specific question about soil health, call your local extension office, your local USDA service center, or a Soil and Water Conservation District office. Music used during today's program was provided courtesy of Mr. Smith. All rights reserved. For the Soil, a conversation is produced by On the Farm Radio in collaboration with Virginia Tech. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii.